Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Tim Loudon. I'm the program manager of the Digital Analytics program here at GSA, and we welcome you all to this intro to Google Analytics for DAP users, or what we like to affectionately call the DAP 101. And I'm joined today by my colleague Freddie Blicker, and we're going to jointly be taking different topics and explaining it to you. At this point, I'm going to throw it over to my colleague Freddie, and he's going to start us off with the webinar. Hey, Freddie.
Great, thanks, Tim. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to present to you on our DAP 101 webcast. So really quickly, going to give a quick overview of the Digital Analytics program. So the DAP program is led by, obviously, Tim. I am an analyst on the DAP program. The program is basically a hosted shared service provided by the Technology Transformation Service within the GSA. It is a program that is essentially free of charge to many different agencies across the federal government. It's no cost. It's a federal-wide web analytics tool. It gives you a full 30,000-foot view of basically all federal agency website data. A couple quick things to note about the DAP program. We obviously are in touch with a lot of you through our ticketing system, where we provide insights and content like our YouTube channel to help guide you through different trainings. We do have future trainings that are going to be found on our events page, where you can see upcoming webcasts or in-person trainings. With the DAP program, we do a lot of implementation support. So many of you on this call have probably come into contact with either Tim or I on our Zendesk system, and we typically provide implementation, QA, and reporting support. So if you have any questions that ever come up from using Google Analytics, definitely feel free to shoot us a note at dap@support.digitalgov.gov. One thing to note about implementation, we have extensive documentation about how to implement DAP, as well as we have a DAP GitHub repo. You can go now, if you don't have access to DAP currently, you can go see analytics.usa.gov. This is a site that gives you really a kind of a public window into a lot of high-level trends from the DAP program. So that's pretty interesting. So you'll want to definitely check that out. And then if you want to fork this dashboard, you could also go to the GitHub repo. And we also provide digital metrics, guidance, and best practices. So let's dive into what is DAP and how does that compare to your own independently managed version of Google Analytics. So many agencies out there, I guess there are a number of scenarios that we typically see with a lot of different agencies in the federal government. So some agencies choose to only have DAP, Google Analytics implemented. Some agencies have both DAP and an independently managed Google Analytics account. And then some agencies will have both DAP and their own GA account and another analytics tool. So there's a lot of different ways that different agencies really approach tracking website behavior. So let's dive a little bit into the differences between the DAP GA versus your own GA. So obviously DAP, as I mentioned, is provided by the GSA as a government-wide service to many federal agencies. This version of Google Analytics is a premium version. So it's called Google Analytics 360. The difference there is that with your own implementation of Google Analytics, it's a free version. So typically, you will not have all of the features that we provide to you out of the box with DAP. So there's definitely a lot of advantages to leveraging DAP as well as your own independently managed Google Analytics. Some of those advantages are in DAP we don't have a hit cliff. So typically in your own independently managed Google Analytics, after 10 million hits, Google Analytics will stop recording data. So if you have a really high traffic website or a number of websites, and you go past 10 million hits, Google Analytics will literally stop reporting. We don't have that limitation in DAP. So that's one really big advantage. The other advantage is dealing with sampling and dealing with different types of custom reports. DAP definitely has a way of creating unsampled reports so that you can get all of the data that you're looking for. You may run into certain challenges with that with your personal independently managed Google Analytics account. So in DAP, the way that we have this implemented, we have an auto tracker. We use some common tag page code, and we auto track different types of events. So these could be PDF downloads or Microsoft Word downloads, mail to links, clicks on phone numbers from a mobile device, just examples like that. Typically, your own independently managed Google Analytics account will not have that. So we provide a lot of the functionality and a lot of really useful tracking to you out of the box with the DAP program. In DAP, we have a number of different profiles. They're created at the agency level. So this gives you a government-wide view from an agency perspective of different website trends. Typically in your own independently managed GA, you'll only have your specific website. With DAP, you can't link with Search Console, but you can with your own independently managed Google Analytics. Now, Search Console is essentially a tool that's provided by Google that helps you understand the health of your website in terms of how Google crawls it, how it consumes the pages, and how it ranks it within search engines. So we can't do that with Google, with DAP, just because of the multiple websites that we have within the account. But at your own independently managed Google Analytics account, you can link those two. DAP can be run concurrently with your own independently managed Google Analytics code or other analytics tool. So you can use a number of different tools and all at the same time. DAP is really designed to roll up data for agencies and collect government-wide metrics. So your own independently managed Google Analytics account is really designed for just your own website. So your GA implementation is going to be different from the DAP implementation. With DAP, you get a lot of added benefits of auto tracking as well as government-wide views of data. So let's move into kind of some DAP 101 basic kind of terms and concepts. So these are really the fundamental foundation of how to think about web analytics and how to use Google Analytics. So what is Google Analytics? So Google Analytics is essentially a piece of software that Google hosts in the cloud and basically tracks website visitors and user behavior. So it will look at things like what traffic sources sent traffic to your website. So was it organic search? Was it a search engine? Was it a referral site? Was it paid search, social media, etc.? And it's basically a platform that helps you understand user behavior and how your users are completing your website goals. So how they convert, how they interact with different content on your website. So it's a service, and we have the premium version in DAP, which helps you understand website trends and helps you get into the psychology of your website visitors. So within Google Analytics, there's kind of two main buckets of data. So the way to think about this is you have one bucket that's dimensions, and you have one bucket that's metrics. So dimensions are basically descriptors. So these are things that describe the data. So you're essentially attributing a characteristic of an object that can be given values. So an example of a dimension could be page, or city, or landing page. Metrics are the countable things. So these are the numbers that you actually pull in Google Analytics. So elements of a dimension that can be measured as a sum or a ratio. So really quickly, just some examples of dimensions and metrics. So you'll see here, dimension, we have city. So that's an example of a dimension. And you see here San Francisco, Berlin, Singapore. This is probably data that you would see in Google Analytics when you look at kind of the geo-targeting reporting within GA. And then metrics are, for example, area in square miles or population. So these are kind of two fundamental buckets of data that you need to understand as you go through training and getting more up to speed with Google Analytics. So we are going to do a poll, and we're going to put that up on the screen. And the first question that we want to pose to you and see what your thoughts are is, which of these is a metric? So everyone take a couple, 10, 15 seconds to look through and select which of these items is a metric. There can only be one. So let's go through these. Let's think through this together. So social source. So think about it this way. You have a social media channel, let's say Twitter. And you have traffic from Twitter that lands on your website. So this is kind of your social source. So that's obviously not a metric. That is a descriptor. Let's talk about landing page. So landing page, saw a couple people selected that. Landing page is a page where people from Twitter would actually land on your website. So again, that is a descriptor, not a number, not a metric. Month of the year. This is another descriptor. So this is kind of a trick that we threw in there. But pages per session is an actual number. It's a ratio, and it shows the relationship between two different numbers. So this would be an example of a metric. So let's do another poll. We're going to look at dimensions. So if everyone on the webcast could choose which one of the following is a dimension, we'll take about 10, 15 seconds and then come back and see what everyone thinks. Okay, let's see what we have here. All right, so which of these is a dimension? So overwhelmingly, we've got 84% of folks on the webcast choosing traffic type. And that is correct. That is a descriptor. So remember the social media example I just went through. That is a type of traffic. So let's walk through why the other selections are not dimensions. So let's talk about session duration. This is basically a time-bound number. This tells you how long an actual session took place. So a session is simply a period of activity from when you enter a site and then leave a site. So this is a number. So a number is always going to be a metric. Same thing with pages per session. Again, this is the ratio that we just talked about. This is the metric. And then mobile sessions, this is also going to be a number. This is something countable, right? This is the activity, the number of sessions from mobile devices. So that's why those three would not be considered a dimension. So very cool, very interesting to see folks' feedback on that. So let's move forward and discuss some more common metrics and dimensions. And we're going to talk kind of high level about what these all mean and when you want to use them. So obviously this is a DAP 101 training, so we're not going to dive too deeply into this. But if anyone has any questions, definitely feel free to pop those into the chat window, and we'll try to answer those when we get to the questions section. Okay, so really the foundation of everything you're going to be diving into in Google Analytics are some really interesting terminology for metrics. So these are really the fundamental things that you need to know as you're going through creating reports, interpreting the data, etc. So let's talk about the first thing. So the first concept here is page view. So a page view happens anytime a page loads, and this includes hitting the back arrow. So let me show you an example of a page view. So I'm on the FERC website. So this is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And let's say I click on About, and the About page loads. This is simply a page view. Then this counts as one page view within a session. So there's also a concept in Google Analytics called unique page view. Now this is an interesting one. So the aggregated page views. So a unique page view is essentially the aggregated page views generated by the same user during a session. However, there can only be one unique page view per page per session. So let me give you an example of what that means, because that can be confusing. And also to note, this is an interesting terminology, kind of terminology that I don't recommend folks dive into in your reporting when you're first starting out. I would save this for later on for very specific types of analysis. So if you don't get this concept right now, that's okay. I would say the other concepts are more important at this point. So let's say I'm on the FERC homepage. So I'm going to go click on, so essentially when I enter the FERC website, this is considered one page view. Let's say I click on the industries link in the navigation. This is another page view. And let's say I hit the back button to get back to the home page. Now, this specifically counts as two page views. However, with unique page views, there's only one unique page view that happens per page per session. So that home page, if we were to pull unique page view data, it would only show up as one unique page view because you can only have one unique page view per page per session. Now, I'm sure some of you are asking, what's the point of that? Like I said, this is more of a nuanced concept that I wouldn't really worry about at this stage, but we just want to make sure to explain these things so that you kind of have a base foundation of knowledge as you go through and you see these concepts in Google Analytics. So let's start, let's go over the concept of a session. So a session in Google Analytics was formerly known as a visit. In different analytics tools, these words are used interchangeably. So if somebody says session or somebody says visit, they're the same thing. But in Google Analytics, you will see GA use sessions as the metric. So a session is essentially the entire time someone is on a site. So basically somebody from the time that you enter a site to the time that you leave a site, that is a session. Now, within that session, which is just simply a period of activity, you can have multiple page views. You could be viewing 13 different pages. That would all be considered part of one session. Let me give you an example of what I mean when I talk about sessions. So let's say I'm on Google and I am searching for FERC. So I do a search. I'm on Google, I see FERC, I click on there. Immediately on this first page, my session begins. So let's say I'm clicking around, I'm interested in legal resources, I want to go find administrative litigation data, and I continue clicking on different files. So we've got a couple PDFs here. And let's say I want to go to enforcement next after that. So we've got a couple things happening here. We have multiple page views happening. We have a download of a PDF. All of that happens within one session. So one session encapsulates all of the activity that you do on a website. Now, let's say I want to leave the site and I go somewhere else. So if I go, let's say I just hit the back button to get back to Google. So then my session has ended. I'm now back at Google. Okay, so the next concept we want to talk about is user. So Google Analytics used to call this visitor. So basically user, visitor, they're the same thing. Different analytics tools use different terminology, but they just basically mean a person who visits a site. So one user can have many sessions, many page views, etc. A user can be a new user. Or if a user has been to your site, they're then cookied. And if they haven't deleted their cookies, when they come back to your site, they'll be considered a returning user. So really, this is just the people who are visiting your site. So these are really kind of four fundamental concepts that you need to keep in the back of your mind as you go through and learn more about Google Analytics. So,
hey, Freddie.
Yeah, sure.
Do you want to maybe just go over the interesting things that happen with different devices regarding the user?
Yes, totally. Yeah, so what is really interesting, so obviously everyone knows about tablets, smartphones, and then you have your desktop computer or your laptop. We do not have it enabled within Google Analytics, but what you can typically do is cross-device tracking. We don't have that enabled in DAP, but the interesting thing to note is, let's say you go to the FERC website on your laptop or on your desktop computer at work. So you're browsing around. Google Analytics will say that, oh, you're a user. You're one user. Now let's say you're walking to catch your bus after work, and you browse and you go to the FERC website on your smartphone. Google Analytics within the DAP framework does not track or connect the fact that you're now a user on a smartphone. So basically Google Analytics tracks kind of two separate users, even though you're the same person. So this is a kind of a common challenge within the analytics world. It's challenging to sync up which user is who, just based on how people use so many different devices to track websites. So if you're browsing, using your tablet, your iPad, or your iPhone, and your desktop, you would be considered three different users within DAP Google Analytics. So that's a really interesting challenge that I think all folks in analytics face, trying to figure out how to differentiate between users and who's using different cross-device phones, tablets, etc.
So make sure you just keep that in mind when you run up to your boss and you're like, boss,
yeah,
our site has 20,000 users. It's like,
exactly.
Actually, it's probably not that many,
yep,
because people probably accessed on different devices.
Definitely. Yep. That's a great point. So let's continue going through some additional concepts. So when you get into Google Analytics, you're going to see at the page level a metric called bounce rate. Now, a bounce rate is simply just the percentage of sessions where a user lands on a page on your website and does not view another page. So this is just a single page session. So let me show you an example of what I mean here. So I'm going back to my FERC example. So let me go back to Google and let me type in FERC. And let's say I'm looking for, I'm looking for FERC. I find the website in Google. I click on that link. I land here. This is just one page. Remember the definition we just went over. This is one page. And let's say I go click the back button to get back to Google because I didn't find exactly what I was looking for. That is considered a bounce. And simply the bounce rate is looking at the percentage of sessions where that happens, where a user lands on only one page and then does not view another page on the site. So we're going to get into bounce rate a little bit later in this presentation. So I'll just kind of leave it kind of high level for right now, but it's a really interesting discussion to have about how do you interpret bounce rate, and is it good or bad? So the next concept is source and medium. So a medium is going to be a source of traffic type, and a source specifies it. So good example is for medium, Google, and then the source is organic. Or for example, with social media, it's going to be Twitter, social. The next concept is referral. So this is simply going to be a visit to your site that's from a link from a third-party site. So this is a website outside of your own website. So let's say FERC. Let's say there's a site on Google that links to FERC, and let's go to FERC on Twitter. So you can see here there's a link to the FERC's website. So if I click on that, this could be considered a referral link. Now this is coming from social. There's a lot of different ways to kind of segment this and look at this, but this fundamentally is kind of the idea. If there's any type of third-party site with a link to your website and somebody clicks on that link, the other website is referring you to your end, kind of your end website. Within Google Analytics, to note about the referral, the dimension is full referrer, and that's going to show the URL of the other site. We have a link in here. There's a lot more terms here. So when you get the deck from us after today's webcast, definitely encourage you to go just do a deep dive and start learning about all these different terminologies. It'll make your experience with Google Analytics that much more meaningful and helpful. Okay. So we've talked a lot about kind of sessions and page views from a really high level. So let's dive into kind of a more nuanced understanding of the difference between some different concepts here. So here we have in this arrow what is representative of a session. Now let's say you have a user come in, they viewed one page. So in our FERC example, I enter the FERC website, I hit the home page, then I clicked on the About page. That would be an additional page view within this session. And then let's say I go back to the home page again. That'd be another page view. So I mentioned the concepts of page views and unique page views in the previous slide. So let's kind of walk through the thought process here, because this is more of a nuanced concept, and we want to make sure that people kind of better understand that. So in this example I just went through, let's go through what is considered a page view. So I viewed FERC's website. So let's say I'm here, I'm on the home page. I then view another page. So I'm going to go to industries. That is a separate page view. And then I go back to the home page. So page one, the home page, has two page views. That's every time a page loads, that is considered a page view. So in this example, we have two page views for the home page. And we have one page view for the industries page that I went to. This gives us a total of 3 page views, and this is all within one session. So remember, a session is just simply a period of activity from when a user enters and then exits a website. So within this session, we've had 3 page views. Now, I mentioned the kind of more nuanced concept of unique page views. So let's kind of walk through that. So in the FERC example, we entered the home page, then we viewed the industries page, and then we browsed with the back button back to the home page. Here's how this works with unique page views. So page 1, even though we have 2 page views, Google Analytics records it as only one unique page view. Now remember, a unique page view is one page that can only have a unique page view happens only when a page can have one page view within a session. So this here in this example, this is counted as simply one unique page view. Now, what's interesting here as well, so obviously we have page 2. This is counted as one unique page view for a total of 2 unique page views. Now, this is a nuanced concept. I don't recommend you dive into using unique page views right off the bat. Save this for later, but we want to make sure that folks know the difference between page views and unique page views and how you pull that data will differ. Now, in this example here with FERC, I entered the home page from Google. So that home page and how Google Analytics tracks it, that is considered to be one entrance. So Google Analytics records that as one entrance. And then I browse to the industry page. And within Google Analytics, page 2, the industries page, has 0 entrances because an entrance happens when you enter a website from an external site. So if it's referral traffic or organic search or social media, and you click on a link that sends you to your website, the first entrance happens on that immediate landing page, which starts your session. So you can only have one entrance. So page 2, the industries page, in my example, will have no entrances. And you don't really have to worry about summing those up. There's always going to be one entrance. And then pages per session is going to be 3. So we have 3 pages viewed within this session. So this is really important, and the reason we go over this is because when you go into Google Analytics, you're going to be presented with a plethora of different metrics, and you need to be able to differentiate between what metrics are important to you to help you answer your questions in your reporting. So I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, great, we have a ton of visits last month. That's great, we're done, bonus please. Well, we want to help you understand that that's not how to think about this. There are a lot of different metrics depending on the context and kind of the goals of your site that you need to consider. So it may not be visits, it may be some other metrics. From a government site perspective, really the #1 goal for a lot of government sites are, essentially disseminating information. So a lot of government sites are getting the right content to the right people at the right time. And it's important to understand, #1, the mission of your website, as well as the goals of your website. These 2 things are going to help you determine which metrics you actually want to pull from Google Analytics. So really understanding the context of why your website exists today is really the first step that you need to understand before you go into Google Analytics and start pulling reporting. So That's a very kind of gray area for a lot of folks. Maybe you don't know why your website exists or what the website's trying to achieve. So how are you supposed to figure out if you're even achieving success? So there's a couple concepts that we want to talk about to help you kind of think about how you're defining success and how to interpret how you define success in Google Analytics. So really, one example of how you can think of how your information is being successful or not is looking at bounce rate. So typically, you'll remember in our previous slide, we talked about bounce rate. So it's one page viewed in a single session, right? So it's where I come in from Google, I land on a page, the page loads on FERC, and then I decide to go back to Google. So that's a bounce. So bounce rate can be interpreted in a couple different ways. It could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. And we want to kind of go over this concept more with you. So bounce rate is the percentage of visitors to a particular website who navigate from the site after viewing only one page. Avinash Kaushik, who is kind of the godfather of analytics, typically says when he's describing bounce rate, I came, I puked, and I left. So in general, bounce rate is not a great thing. So a high bounce rate is not a great thing. But again, that really depends on the context through which you're looking at your data. So a high bounce rate is typically anything over 50% for non-blog sites. So if you're looking at your site and you're seeing a 70% bounce rate, and you've determined that you want people to stay on your site for longer periods of time to consume your information, then perhaps in that context, a 70% bounce rate is not going to be a good thing. One thing to note, events can confound bounce rate. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. That's more of a nuanced concept, so we'll dive into that in a little bit later in this presentation. Okay, so getting back to how you think about your site, how it's performing, is it successful or not, right? So many of our sites in the federal government are trying to provide the right information to the right users at the right time, right? So given the definition of the bounce rate, so remember, it's the percentage of visitors to a particular website who navigate away from the site after viewing only one page. Given that definition, we can kind of look at this in two different ways. So we can look at it from a negative perspective. So a high bounce rate could mean that users did not find what they were looking for on the page that began their session. We could interpret it as users did not know the next action to take. So maybe this would infer there's UX issues, or maybe the navigation on your website is confusing. On the flip side, perhaps this could be a good thing, right? If you're providing your users with the right content at the right time and they immediately find what they need, perhaps a high bounce rate means that on that first page where they landed, they immediately found the information that they were looking for. So we kind of pose these two different scenarios, all with the intention of trying to help you think about why your site exists and in what context you're trying to provide information to your users, right? Because you could really interpret a high bounce rate as either a bad thing or a good thing. One example of a good inference from having a high bounce rate would be, Tim always likes to use the example of the National Park Service. So NPS had a blog post about, I guess, a bear alert. So if you have users who find that blog post from social media or wherever, and they get that information, and they're at a park, and they see that there's a notice about bears being in the park, and then they leave that site immediately, well, that's probably a good thing that they found that information, right? You don't want users hanging out trying to find the bear alert and taking 5 minutes when they could just get the information and flee to safety. So
those rabid bears.
Right, exactly. So as you can see, what we're trying to help you do is really trying to differentiate between different interpretations of these metrics. And probably at this point, it's a little bit challenging from your perspective to understand kind of these nuances, but that's why we're doing all these trainings. And in future trainings, which we hope you'll attend, we definitely dive into these concepts more and help you try to figure out why your site exists and what types of goals are you trying to achieve.
Actually, could I jump in here for a second?
Yeah, sure.
There's something about bounce rate. So whenever I'm talking to folks and agencies about bounce rate, because it seems like it's become a metric that a lot of folks take really seriously. Everyone's like, "Oh, we have a high bounce rate. What does that mean? Is that bad?" I actually don't recommend that you look at bounce rate in the sense of your entire site at all. I don't think bounce rate is really a site level metric. It doesn't do you any good, because at this point, most sites have some content. If you're, for example, if it's blog content, you aren't necessarily asking people to view lots of different pages on your site. You may just want them to get, as Freddie was talking about with the NPS example, you may just want folks to read your blog, your singular blog post. And if you're, broadcasting it out via like email blasts and social media and things like that, if you bring lots of eyes to that page, but then it's bringing up your bounce rate because folks read it and left, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
If you have an 80% bounce rate on your homepage, that's a warning sign. You definitely want to take a look and find out maybe something's wrong with your SEO, or people are finding your page for the wrong reasons or something like that. But like I said, looking at a page by page level is a better way to look at bounce rate. And a little later on, when I walk you through sort of the interface, we're going to take a look at bounce rate in contrast to landing page. And that's a really good way to take a look at bounce rates for specific pages.
Yep, I agree with that. Okay, so the next concept we want to talk about are pages per session. So this is another concept that we've gone over in a previous slide. And this really also highlights how you could interpret this as a good or a bad thing. So let's say you have a blog post on your site. Let's say you have a high, pages per session metric. So you have like 3 pages per session or 10 pages per session, whatever the number is. From a positive perspective, if you have a high pages per session metric, you could interpret this as, okay, yes, users are engaged, they're clicking on lots of pages. However, if you have, let's say you have the 10 pages per session, you could also infer from a high pages per session metric that perhaps users are determined to find something else, but they can't. So perhaps that points to a UX issue or a site organization, site architecture issue, right? So perhaps users are confused at the end of the day. So really, we bring this up to really, again, just really highlight how different metrics can be interpreted in different ways, depending on why your site exists and what you're trying to achieve with your site. So we hope that's helpful as you go through and start having to interpret and deal with a lot of gray area with all this data in Google Analytics. So in both of these cases, the user is engaged, but they're engaged for very different reasons. So again, just to drive home, different metrics can be interpreted in different ways. Okay, another example of putting this into practice. Let's say you have an increase in new visitors. Okay, so I could look at this data and say, great, our site is catching on. Look at all these different users. They're checking us out. They're browsing our website, etc. So we've got a ton of new traffic, new visitors. The other way of looking at this is that perhaps new visitors is not such a great thing. So let's say that your website is the authority on whatever topic. So let's say FERC is the authority on mortgages or other kind of financial issues.
Energy regulatory
policy. Yes, exactly. Energy regulatory policy. I was thinking of FHFA. So with FERC, if they're the authority on energy regulation, somebody finds them through Google, they enter the website. If you see in your data that you have a ton of new visitors, perhaps in this context, this means that something not so great is happening, because if you're the authority, people should be coming back. So you should be seeing an uptick in returning visitors. So if you see an uptick in new visitors and you're the authority and you're seeing a decrease in returning visitors, perhaps that points to another situation where your site isn't performing as you would hope. So really kind of the increase in new visitors is another example of how, depending on your site, depending on the context, you can interpret this metric in two different ways. And again, we can't necessarily tell you that from the DAP program. We can just help guide you in how to think about these things. But really, at the end of the day, your site mission and your goals are going to help you determine the context and what lens to view these different metrics through. So let's, if there's any questions, let's take those right now. And hopefully folks have some questions. We're happy to answer those right now.
We do have some. Great. Actually, I think there's one that you can take, and there's one that I'll take. And,
awesome.
And just going back to the point that you just made regarding those different metrics and being able to relate things to your goals. The former program manager of the digital analytics program, the person who really got it off the ground, our good friend Marina Fox, who works in a different office in GSA now, she used to always say there's no such thing as a golden metric. There's no single metric or for that matter, single dimension that's going to tell you whether or not your site is successful. And that's one of the hardest things to try to convey, especially to folks who aren't super familiar with web analytics. And if you're working with supervisors that are asking you for reports and all they're asking for is page views, for example, which is the be all end all of all the metrics, everyone always wants to know page views. It's not necessarily telling you the full story. And right before I get to this, the questions here, one of the things that I have a fictional example that I use to demonstrate the golden metric rule, especially for page views, and that's sort of, if there were some website within HHS that was designed to grant neurosurgeons money to try to do research to figure out a cure for brain cancer, it might only have 100 page views a month. But if they manage to find the neurosurgeon that cures brain cancer and give him the money to do the research, or he or she, give that neurosurgeon that grant, then hey, that was a wildly successful site. So just actually, putting that into context, there's no such thing as a golden metric. Okay, so the first question, Freddie, that I want to raise, and it's a really good question regarding session. And this person asks, what if you were to leave a tab or window open in the background? Is the session still on?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how I would answer that is it really depends on the analytics tool that you're using. I'm actually not sure how that works with DAP.
Oh, well then let me take it.
Yeah, totally.
So yes, the session, so if you, for example, if you're on a site and you click on a link and it opens that link in a new tab, and you are playing in that new tab and you don't go back to the old one for a while, the session does stay running. And there's this concept called a session timeout that by default in all Google Analytics implementations, the session times out after 30 minutes of inactivity. So if you were to leave that tab open for 30 minutes or longer, and then come back to it and start clicking on things again, it's going to start a new session. It's going to be a second session. If you come back after 29 minutes and 30 seconds and start clicking on things again, it's going to be just a continuation of the session you've already created. And that's also something to keep in mind when you're looking at average time per session, how long people are spending on a session. It's very possible that those are affected by folks, especially with today's browsers. I know I always have like 20 Chrome tabs open, and so that's a very, very good question.
Yeah,
the other
question.
thing that came through here is how is privacy protected when using web-based apps where things like personally identifiable information and protected health information are entered by the user. So a couple things to note on that. Number one, DAP should not be implemented behind login walls. The Digital Analytics program is designed for public-facing web pages. So if you have a login where there's danger of exposure to PII, then actually it's not necessarily exposure to PII unless you're passing it in your URLs, which I hope no one on the call today is passing PII in their URLs. That's not something that we recommend. But that's more of like, I would say, a security issue. And then in terms of collecting PII or things like that, if you have a public web-based app where things are being entered and it's not through an auth process, as long as you are not passing PII through any of the areas that DAP is, or that Google Analytics is collecting data, you're okay. So in that sense, it usually it mainly refers to the URL because they record the Google Analytics records the actual URL of the visit. As long as you're not passing PII there, it's not looking into any forms or fields or anything like that without customization on your end.
Oh, one point on that as well. Also, if you're using campaign parameters, do not put any PII or any type of sensitive information in there.
Correct. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about campaign parameters in a bit. Let me see. There's a few questions that came in here. How does it change view counts if a back button is used versus an internal link or breadcrumb to get back to a previous page?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I don't think it would change it would not change page view counts because you'd still be going back to another page. So in our example for FERC, every page that you load in your browser is counted as one page view. So that's always going to be one page view. If you go back to the same page, let's say 4 different times, whether you click the back button or if you click on a link, that page is still only going to have one unique page view. So that's kind of the difference, and that's what I think the person with that question is asking. Most importantly, every page, whenever it's rendered in your browser, that's always just one page view. Anytime a page loads, that is a page view.
Great. The last question I think that we'll cover right here is, can certain pages be excluded from analytics? And yes, so the way Google Analytics works is that you have to have the Google Analytics script tag in the HTML of every page that you want to track. So in most cases, folks with like content management systems, they can put something in a header. For those of you that are on the call who are familiar with the setup of HTML, if you put it in the header, you can put it across sort of the entire lot of your web pages writ large. But you can also usually be able to exclude certain pages if you'd like to. We're going to continue with our DAP 101 now that you sort of have an understanding of dimensions and metrics and some of the key terms and metrics and things like that. We're actually going to get to the fun part where we start actually going within the Google Analytics interface to take a look at information. So basically, and I'm not going to be bound to these slides here, I just kind of want to do an overview of what happens while you're in the interface. So if you go to analytics.google.com and you log in, you may be taken to one of two places. Google Google just recently did a user interface change. And so some people might be taken to the audience overview page if they've not been upgraded to the new interface, or some people might see this, which is the Google Analytics new home page, which is just being rolled out to users on a rolling basis. So some people might not have it yet and some might. But I'm going to go back to the audience overview section and we're going to start there. So a few things to note right off the bat. So you can see up here on the left-hand side that since Freddie was using FERC as his example, I decided to just go ahead and continue to use FERC. We're going to take a look at all the reports through this profile. You can see when you log in that the profiles are all set up by agency. So if you click on the top left-hand side, you can then, you have your accounts all on the left, followed by the properties, and then you have your specific views here. So we have a couple views in our property that are designed for government-wide roll-up, which is the government-wide view and the Z3 view. But most of you will be doing your reporting directly in your agency view, or your what used to be called profile. See, we named everything profile when they called it that, and then they switched the name on us, and now they call it views. But that's what happens. Sometimes Google just changes things on us. So, we've got all the different agencies that are participating, and each agency that's participating has its own specific profile. And if you're doing sort of reporting to be able to look at information for a specific site, I definitely recommend you do it in your own agency profile, because that's where you'll have less of a chance of getting sampled data. So anyways, we're in the FERC profile here, and you can see how we've kind of got things set up. In the left-hand side, there's this navigation, which basically will take you through all the possible reporting options you have. And I'm not going to go over everything today, but in your spare time, I definitely recommend that you pretty much go down this entire left-hand side and click on everything, just so you can see all the different reports that are offered to you. Also of note, over here, you can see that we've got a default date range of the last 30 days. You can change that and make it look at any amount of time you'd like. It comes with some preset date ranges, like yesterday, last week, last month, and so on and so on. And so by last month, it would actually only show me June, because that's the last whole month, as opposed to last 30 days where it would start yesterday. One word of caution, I would not recommend that you use today as something that you would measure, because the data as it processes after it's collected takes between 4 and 8 hours to appear in the reporting interface, except for the real-time section, and I'll show you the real-time section in a moment. But most of the reports where you're doing actual analysis work, they probably won't be reflective of today, in the sense that they're going to be severely delayed. So I don't really ever use today. I pretty much always start things at the day before, and when you click on any of these other reports, it will start at the day before and then look backward. So other things that we can do with the date ranges here. If I want to, I can do a comparison. So firstly, let me say I could do a custom date range where I could just choose from Tuesday to Wednesday or something like that. That's totally up to you. But let's say I'm just going to use the default of the last 7 days. And I'm really interested in being able to look at the last 7 days in comparison to the 7 days before that, because maybe I ran some sort of outreach campaign or something like that. You can click compare to, and then it'll compare to the previous period, and you can see one is in orange and one is in blue. And if I hit apply, it will then apply that date range to every report that's available in the whole Google Analytics default reporting section. So then you can see how things might have changed, and obviously the 22nd and 23rd are weekend days. That's when traffic usually slumps for government sites. But you can compare that in this past 7 days, there's been, looks like, slightly more traffic than the 7 days before that to FERC websites. And then the other cool thing about doing a comparison is that it will give you percent changes. So there were 8.79% more sessions in the time period for the more recent time period than in the period before that, and so on for all of the different metrics and dimensions. And note that this will be present anywhere you go along this left side. So let's say I'm interested in looking at the location of visitors. I can go to the location report, and it'll actually break it down for me so that you can see each week where people were coming from. And so if you're an agency, for example, that does some sort of outreach campaigns to specific countries or specific cities, you can use this to see if traffic increased or decreased based on your campaigns. And I think if I click through, like if I click through Canada, it should break down Canada into cities for me. Oh, it goes provinces. That's cool. So most visits were from Ontario that came to this. But if oh, here we go. We can click country, city, continent, or subcontinent. So if I click on city, it'll then break it down for us by city. So that makes sense, Washington, D.C. being the #1 source of traffic. Anyways, that's just sort of getting familiar with how things are laid out. We've got the reports on the left, the agency profiles up in the top left. You can search for an agency profile like this, and so you won't always have to search around. You can just kind of type it in. Another thing to make sure is that some people, they email us and they say, I have analytics, but it doesn't look like the DAP implementation. It doesn't look like the government-wide analytics. And that might be because up here, you're not signed in with your DAP-enabled government email. So if you maybe are accidentally accessing with your personal Gmail address or something like that, you may not see other things. So always make sure that it's, you can see here it says the Google account is for timothy.loudon@gsa.gov. We'll talk about some of the other things you can do with this menu up here in a little while. But first, I want to just sort of show you some of the reports that we've got. So let me just get rid of the comparison and just go back to a week's worth of data here. So starting at the audience overview, it kind of gives you a good snapshot of a bunch of different things that are happening. Over the last week, there were 32,000 sessions, 19,000 users, 85,000 page views, and so on and so on. You can see here we do have a bounce rate. This is for the whole site, and remember I told you I'm not a big fan of looking at bounce rate for a whole site, so I don't really pay attention to this particular thing very much. I prefer to look at bounce rate in the landing pages report, which I'll show you in just a moment. So you can get, a sort of overview about your new versus returning visitors. As Freddie was noting, so FERC is kind of the authority on their subject matter, and you can see that they have quite a bit more, almost twice as many, well, I guess 2/3 to 1/3 returning visitors versus new visitors, which is meaning that, whatever the industry that works directly with FERC is, they've been engaging quite a bit with the website. So you can take a look at all kinds of things here. You can look at the languages, and this is the language of the browser, not the language that someone speaks. I'm glad that Google cannot yet determine what language I speak. It can only determine the language that I set my browser to. You can look at things like technology of who was visiting, or like the 43% of sessions were coming from Chrome in the last week, and so on and so on. There's all kinds of interesting things about mobile. You can look at the operating systems, even the size of the screen, and so on. So this is really great if you're looking to try to optimize for different screen sizes, and there's lots of different stuff there. So you can go ahead and go through here, and basically the overview gives you an at-a-glance view of a lot of the things that you can see if you scroll through these and you take a look at the different reports that it offers you. But I want to talk about a few reports in particular, and we're going to start off in the behavior section. So we're going to go down here to behavior, and under site content, there's the all pages report, which is sort of a really base level look at all of the different pages. And so a lot of folks, they are interested in knowing if there was a difference in the way users were interacting with a specific page. And this is the way you can find it. And you can see right now we're sorting by page views, which again, I don't believe is the thing that is the most important, but in a lot of cases, it's used to be able to tell whether or not you were able to succeed in your outreach or campaigns and things like that. And the home page obviously is the most viewed page, which is great, but it only has 20%, less than 20% of total page views. So there are a lot of different pages, If we look down here, there are 1,487 total rows. It's only showing me 10 right now, but I can expand this up to 5,000 rows. So if I wanted to see this entire report, I could. Let's try to go and find a more obscure page at FERC.gov so that I can show you how you can use the search functionality. Careers is always pretty popular everywhere. How about, yeah, here we go. Legal MOU. So if I want to try to see stats on this particular page, I can copy this, whatever, something unique from the URL, right? And I can then search for that. Now, one thing I want to note while we're looking here, notice that in the URL bar, we've got https://www.ferc.gov. In DAP, we just have ferc.gov. So in our Google Analytics implementation, we chose to aggregate views of either www or non-www. And that's because there are many sites where if you type in www, it'll stay in the URL. And if you don't type in www, it will still load the page. And if we didn't create a system where those would be combined, you'd have them in two different rows. And really, you're looking at the same content. So just so you know, if you don't see the www in there, it's because we have applied special filters that strip away the www and make sure that all of the views to that content are shown in one row. Okay, so we want to find the legal MOU page. So if I go here and I go in this little search box, we can see that, oh wow, interesting. On Monday, there was a big spike for this legal MOU page where you can see that there were a bunch more page views than usual. In fact, usually it gets very few. So maybe something was going on where people needed to go find those. It's got a pretty high bounce rate, but remember, bounce rate is only for when that page is being landed on. So there's no such thing as a bounce rate for this page if you got to it from the home page, because once you've visited more than one page in a site, there can't be a bounce. So the bounce rate is only reflective of when this is a landing page, and we'll look at the landing page report as well. So here's something really interesting that I want to show you that is a report that even was a secret to me until I had been dealing with Google Analytics for like a couple years. Up here, there's this little tab where you can click Navigation Summary. And if you click Navigation Summary, I needed to go one more path forward. So you have to click through the page until it's no longer a link. Now see, it's like, okay, this is our final destination. We're looking at ferc.gov/legal/MOU. Now if I click Navigation Summary, there's a really interesting report here where it says, okay, I'm looking specifically at this page. It tells me how many times it was an entrance for this particular time period. So 10% of visits to this page were directly to ferc.gov/legal/MOU. That's an entrance, meaning it was the landing page. It was the first place that someone went when they came in as part of their session. 90% of folks came from other pages within the site. And so now it'll show you which of those previous pages people were at. So most people got there the way I did, which is through the homepage. But also there must be a way to get there from all these other pages. So digital strategy and e-library and things like that. Then you can come over here and see, okay, after people visited this page, how many of them exited the site? And that's 12.2%. So that's a low number. That means a lot of people went into other things. And it looks like there aren't any clear indications of what exactly where people were going afterward, but they stayed in the site. They went to these industry pages or the docs pages or other legal pages and things like that. 87% of them did. They stayed within site and went to a different page. So this is a really cool report to try to understand a little bit of the behavior of your users. If you are interested in certain pages and how people are getting to those pages and if they're leaving afterward or staying within the site, you can use this report. And then once you're in this report, you can then sort of piece things together, like breadcrumb them together. Like if I then click on the industries page, you do this exact same thing except looking at the industries/gas page. So a lot of people came to this particular page from the home page, and most people afterward went and saw approved projects. that is like where they, 17% between these two pages, 30%-ish of folks that visited here went to one of these two places, and 15% left. So that's the navigation summary report that's available in the all pages report. It's really great. I recommend that you use it, especially if you're looking to understand behavior a little bit better. Here's another couple tricks I want to show you as we're getting familiar with the interface. Always kind of look up here for different tabs that they have. Remember when I was in the audience overview section, there was a little tab where, oh, was it audience overview? Where was I? I was in a different report a minute ago where I was trying to show you, oh, it was geography. So for location, it started off showing me countries, right? But when I look up here, it gives me different options, different dimensions. So I could look at continent or I could click on city. Well, the same thing exists for the all pages report, which I'm going to go back to now. You can read things by page, which refers to URL, or you can click on page title. And so that will show you the page title. And in some cases, that might be more beneficial. I know at GSA, for example, gsa.gov, the entire structure of the website is based on numbers. So a page URL for gsa.gov might be like gsa.gov/content or portal/content like 105928. And just looking at the URL, it doesn't give you a lot of information. But if you click on page title, it's a little bit more descriptive and you know which pages people are going to visit. And I can tell you for gsa.gov, the page people are going to visit is the per diem rate lookup page. That's the most popular page on gsa.gov. So you can switch between page and page title. And then here's another fun trick. So you can see that this report has one dimension and many metrics. So this first column for page is a descriptor, a dimension, and everything after here is a metric. Let's say that I'm really interested in knowing another dimension. You can add one here in this box, the secondary dimension. So I could say I want to know how many people are visiting the pages by which device they're using. And so if I type in device category, which is a dimension that will tell us whether or not someone's visiting on a desktop, a laptop, or a tablet. And it's hard, you just kind of get to know these things as you work more in Google Analytics. You just start to know what the different dimensions are called. But if you ever need to kind of look around, you can always actually not type anything in and just run through and look at all the different things and try to pick one out. But I happen to know that this one is device category, so I'll click that. And it's going to add another column with the device category dimension. So you can see, especially, wow, for this site, almost everyone is visiting it on desktop. A lot, there's not even in the top 10 rows anything. This is the first time we get here. So number 15 is viewing the homepage on a mobile. There were 655 total page views doing that. But it looks like this is a really heavily desktop dominated site. And really depends on what agency you work for and what kind of work you do that determines that. We have about a 43% across all participating DAP websites. There's about 5,000 DAP websites. 43% of all traffic is coming from either mobile or tablet these days. It doesn't look like that's the case for FERC, but it is definitely the case for things like NPS and NASA and some of the things that people like to look up more when they're on the go. So that is using secondary dimension. Okay, another report I want to show you, the landing page report. So it's also under site content. We've got landing pages. Now we're looking at only pages that were the first page of a session. So think about that. We're not looking at all page views. We're saying how many times was a session started where this particular URL was the first place someone landed. And almost 37% of the time, people land on the FERC homepage. But that means that, quick math, 63% of the time, people are landing on other pages first. And it looks like this eLibrary page is the second most popular place to land. Let's take a look at what that is. So this must be, oh, it's got special permission stuff. So folks must be coming to this e-library to look for a specific regulatory language or something like that. Forgive me if there are folks from FERC on the line, because I'm not super familiar with energy regulatory policy. But so this is something that maybe folks in this industry definitely need to access a lot and look things up in the e-library. It's the number 2 most landed on page. So that means folks probably have it bookmarked, or they Google for FERC e-library or something, and they're getting that result. So now, this is a really good spot to look at bounce rate, because now you're looking at, okay, a bounce rate is determined by someone who lands on in a site, on a page, and then leaves. So landing page is the best dimension to team up with bounce rate. So you can see when people land on the home page, very low bounce rate. 24% of people land on the home page and then leave. More than 3/4 are actually moving on from there. 30% land on the e-library and leave. Now here's an interesting one. 78.96% leave for this particular page. And I think it sounds like this is a page that takes you out of the site. So maybe that's an expected action. Let's see. Yeah, so this is where probably FERC employees actually go to telework or connect via VPN. And I'm imagining it does. So you can see that if I click on this, it takes me to ssl.ferc.gov, which is not ferc.gov. This is a good point to raise right now. This is what we call a second level domain. So the .gov portion of the URL is what we call sometimes you hear people use the acronym TLD, the top level domain. So .gov, .com, .org, those are top level domains. A second level domain is something dot something. So in the case of federal government, it's something.gov. And that might be cdc.gov or treasury.gov or ferc.gov or whatever it may be. These are second level domains. This ssl.ferc.gov is considered a third level domain, or pretty much I refer to them as subdomains. Anything beyond a second level domain, I refer to as a subdomain. And every, by default at least, DAP is set up so that every subdomain acts like its own completely independent site. So if I'm traveling from ferc.gov to ssl.ferc.gov, that is leaving the site. Therefore, it would constitute a bounce if I landed here, clicked on this, and then left. Actually, it wouldn't. And I'll explain why that is in just a second, because there's an event that fires here. So remember how we talked about bounce rate and how events confound bounce rate. So let's show you events, and then this will make more sense. So we've got a bunch of different events here. DAP comes, as Freddie mentioned earlier, DAP comes preloaded with a tracker that will show you a bunch of different kinds of events. And events are broken down into sort of 3 levels of breadth, I guess. Event category is the largest bucket. You get a little smaller with event action, and you get more granular with event label. So you start out with event category, and these are the different types of things that we track. So number 1 is outbound links. What constitutes an outbound link? An inbound link is anything within a site. So if I'm on the home page and I want to click on industries, I'm still traveling within ferc.gov to ferc.gov. That's an inbound link. What we saw with that VPN page was that it was taking me out of ferc.gov, but it was linked in the page. So let me see if I can find something else to do that. So here we go. This is going to take me to etariff.ferc.gov. So this link is taking me out of this particular site, and therefore it's called an outbound link click. So DAP will automatically track your outbound link clicks. And let me show you what that looks like. So, okay, we've got a bunch of outbound links. Let's go to the next level of granularity. I need to know what these outbound links were. So the number one place it takes people is the elibrary.ferc.gov, which I imagine is once you're on that eLibrary page, you type in your search term and it gives you results on the eLibrary site. What if I want to know like the exact pages where people were clicking? So here's an interesting one, usajobs.gov. Maybe they have some listings for their career section that take you to jobs at FERC. And so I can click on usajobs.gov and it's then going to show me the specific pages that people clicked from within the site to lead out there. So these are probably specific job postings on USA Jobs. That is outbound link clicks, but now we've also got things like downloads. And so when we get a little bit more granular in downloads, we've got event action, which is telling you what kind of extension it was. So do you want to see PDFs or Excel spreadsheets or TXT documents and so on and so on. PDF is probably overwhelmingly the most popular for all agencies. And then the event label here will show you the exact PDF that people are downloading. So this is something about gas approval. Let's take a look at what it is. Oh, maybe I can't see it. There we go. So here is something about, who knows? This is not my field, but this is the number one most downloaded PDF from the site. Or was that the number one, or did I click on a different one? Let's see what I did. No, that's the number one. 212 downloads in the last 7 days. So you can see which PDFs, and again, you can search for them. So if you know a specific PDF that it lives on your site and you want to know how many times it's been downloaded, you can search for it. I can just put in a word here like energy, and it'll return all of the PDFs that contain the word energy. So if you have a specific, you could obviously highlight and copy and paste everything, part of the location of it, or you could just type in a word that that happens to exist and be able to look up the download. So we also track outbound downloads, which means it's a download of a file that is not from your domain. So if I wanted to find information specifically about ferc.gov and I had a download to like an OPM document and it was at an OPM URL, like opm.gov/ this is my PDF or whatever, that would be an outbound download. And it also collects mail tos and outbound mail tos and telephone clicks. And then this particular one, number 5, this is a custom event that someone at FERC must have set up for people coming from maybe clicking on something within an email. But you can also set up some custom events, but it comes with a bunch by default. Okay. Something that is definitely important to mention that I feel like I may not have mentioned yet is that everything we see here in the sort of default reporting section, it is inclusive of all FERC websites. So currently are all FERC websites, I guess, that are participating in DAP, meaning they have the DAP code put on them. So we're seeing mostly only content from ferc.gov, but if I go to the content drill down, okay, so for this particular agency, ferc.gov is the only site that they have implemented with the digital analytics program. But if we go to, for example, like EPA, and we're looking at the same report, it's going to contain data from all of these different websites. So the reporting section, the default reporting section, is where you get information on all of the things that are, all of the data that's piling in there. Now, obviously, if you're looking at all pages, it has your specific, the specific pages that relate to a site. So you can see, EPA.gov versus regulations.gov or something like that. But just to go back in the other example here, we're going to show you in the final section, the third leg of this presentation, how you can do things to look at only one website. This one just happens to only have one website. But most of the profiles that you'll see that you all will be working in contain data for many different sites. So you just need to be cognizant of that. It's not like you're looking at only yours when you look at bounce rate or things like that on the site level, or at the profile level, I'm sorry. Okay, what other reports do I want to show you? We looked at audience overview, we looked at pages, we filtered the pages report, we looked at the landing report. Yeah, so this kind of got a little screwy when I put it in the presentation mode, but we did an analysis a couple years ago where we found that 26% of all landing pages were on home pages and 74% were actually coming in what we call sideways, which is usually through either social posts or looking right on an organic search engine, which 90-something% of the time is Google. So that's just something to keep in mind and know. I think there was a time when we were looking at government websites with home pages as the place that everyone would start at, and that's just not the case anymore. Organic search engines are really powerful and really good, and everyone goes to Google to look things up, and oftentimes they're not clicking on your homepage. Especially people aren't landing on home pages if you don't have a very easy to remember web URL. So like cdc.gov is like, CDC is a pretty well-known brand, and it's very easy to remember. And so people might type in cdc.gov if they're looking for information on Zika or Ebola or something like that, rather than go on Google and type in Ebola and then go to the CDC specific Ebola page, which is not the homepage. But if the site that you're working on is something that's long or difficult to remember, like my favorite government website, papahanaumokua.gov. So I went to their homepage because I typed in papahanaumokua.gov, but I doubt many other people do that. So people that are looking for this are probably not going to the homepage unless they're maybe just typing in, I don't even know how they would find it on Google. I guess Marine National Monument, who knows? But difficult URLs to type in, people often aren't going to the homepage. Okay. Oh, this is exactly what I talked about. So we definitely talked about what you can learn from the landing pages. It's a great spot to combine it with bounce rate to get interesting insights about whether or not your pages are achieving what you want them to. Like I said, if you have a home page that has a high bounce rate, or you have any page on your site that's designed to take people or to direct people in one of many directions, you definitely don't want a high bounce rate there. We took a look at some of the events reporting, looked at the PDF downloads. Aha! Okay, I want to ask you a question, and you can try to answer this question by putting your answer in the chat box. But if you include a direct link to a PDF in an email or social media post, it will not record in Google Analytics. Who can tell me why that is? All right. Oh, what are people saying here? Interesting, because they're events, not page views. There's no analytics code on the PDF, so that's the correct answer there. And let's see what else people said. You're obtaining it from the download site, not the page. So you guys you're very astute. That's well done. If you put a link to a PDF, a specific PDF, like the one that I had up earlier, I don't know, was it here? No, I think I must have had it in a different tab that I closed. But let's say, here's one here. Let's see. I'll just click on this. So this PDF, right? If I take this link and I put it in an email and I send it to folks and I say, hey, take a look at this, Google Analytics is not going to tell me how many people viewed this PDF. And the reason is the way Google Analytics works is by having JavaScript load when the page loads in the HTML and telling the browser to collect a bunch of information, or telling the JavaScript to collect a bunch of information. What's key to that is that you have to have the code in the HTML. Well, a PDF doesn't have HTML. There's nothing behind it. So like if I'm at the Papahanaumoku Akea, I can right click and say view page source, and here's all the code behind the site, right? There's none of that in a PDF. There's no way to look behind it because, you know, in terms of code, there's no code behind it. This is just a file. Therefore, we can't put the Google Analytics JavaScript code on this file. So the way that Google Analytics tracks a PDF download is literally by looking at the link. So I'm not sure if you all can see, it's probably kind of small, but in the lower left-hand corner of my screen, if I hover over this link, it shows me what the link's going to be. And basically what we've set up Google Analytics to do is look for links that contain .pdf, .xls, .doc, and so on, .zip, so that it knows if it's a file. And then when you click on this link, it identifies it as you looking at a file, and it will record that link. But if you just send this out like in a social media post or in an email, or if you link to it in you know, some sort of external like Washington Post article or something like that, you're not going to be able to track how many people viewed this PDF. I've had a lot of folks over the years email me saying, you know, I don't understand. It doesn't look like anyone read this PDF, but we sent it out to 10,000 people in an email blast to like all of our contacts. And I have to tell them, I'm sorry, unless it was a click from an actual web page that had the Google Analytics script on it, we can't actually track that. And people want to know how you can track that. The best thing I could tell folks is to try to do it via server logs. But in many cases, it's pretty hard to get a hold of server logs. If you could find out how many times the server actually served this file, that would be the only way that I would know how to track it. So well done by the sleuths on the line who were typing that in. And then, okay, so here's where I was talking about events and bounce rate. So if an event triggers on a page, there are two types of events. This is where we start to get a little hairy. So remember, our events are like downloads, outbound link clicks, mail to links, things like that. If an event happens on a page, it either is classified as an interaction event or a non-interaction event. All of the events that are in DAP by default are interaction events. And an interaction event means that a user has accomplished something you asked them to do on the page, in this case, do a download or a link click or something. And therefore, if they leave after that, it's not a bounce. So let me just try to like make sure that everyone's clear on this. The example that I went to where we went somewhere else, like let me go back here. If I'm at FERC.gov and I have a link on FERC.gov and it goes to etariff.ferc.gov, I'm leaving FERC, but I'm doing it by clicking a link so that it's like it's here. It's something you want someone to do. You want them to click on that. So if my landing page, let's say I go to Google and I'm looking up FERC and I land here, okay, boom. If I were to go up in here and then type in type in irs.gov, that would be a bounce. If I were to click back and go back to Google, that would be a bounce. But because I'm clicking here, even though I'm leaving the site, it triggers an event. And it's an interaction event because it's a link that you wanted someone to click. So boom, I go to etariff.ferc.gov. That is not a bounce. I hope that made sense to everyone. So in the sense that we were talking about that page where people went to the VPN, if they clicked on that VPN link, it would actually not be a bounce. And that particular page had a high bounce rate. So what that says to me is that people are coming there and being like, oh, I don't want to log into my VPN right now. And they just leave and go somewhere else. All right. Now that we got that cleared up. Okay, so what can you know about your visitors with Google Analytics? As I said, tons of metrics and dimensions to get to know, but in general, you know, you can know whether users are new and returning. You can know the language they have their browser set to, their location. And one thing I want to note about location is that when you are traveling through the internet on your own time, your non-work time, and you're at home and you're visiting a bunch of different sites, there's a very good chance that most of the sites that have analytics tools are getting your location by recording your IP address, your internet protocol address. And everyone has an IP address for their specific devices. And as you travel around the internet, you carry your IP address with you. And if you set your Google Analytics tools to collect that information, or your web analytics tools, whatever they may be, they can get your location from that because your IP address gets registered from a certain spot. DAP does not collect any IP addresses. There's a debate over whether or not IP addresses constitute PII. To be honest, we don't want to get anywhere near that debate. So we choose not to collect. We don't collect any IP information. It's anonymized at the earliest available point, and your IP addresses are never stored. Any visitor to sites that are being tracked with DAP. So how does that affect our location? It makes Google have to revert to basically a ping from a network rather than an individual IP address. And so when we have the ping from a network, it's possible that the location, if you have someone in sort of a rural location, it may mark them as like the nearest town. For most people, that's not a big deal. I don't think anyone needs to be pinpointing folks in any specific rural location, but it's pretty accurate for getting within a certain area of a town or city. And it's certainly accurate when you're looking at state or especially country, things like that. Another interesting thing is that you can look at a report for internet service provider. So check this out. If I go to audience, technology, network, it's actually going to tell me which networks are visiting the FERC sites. And this is pretty interesting. 8% of all visits are coming from within the the FERC, I'm sorry. And in some cases, you get this not set. People always ask me what this not set means. And to be honest, you don't have a good answer. There are just some things that Google cannot collect. And when it says not set, it means it came in sort of unknown. It didn't have an associated service provider with the session, and it just puts it in a not set category. So we just kind of have to deal with that. But you can see your normal service providers here, Comcast, Time Warner, things like that. What's really interesting is that you can set up, when we talk about a little later about customization, you can actually set up a custom segment so that you filter out all the traffic coming from within your agency. So we could set a filter on here, a segment, so that all of these 2600 sessions would not be included in any of the reports. And I think, Freddie, maybe that's a great example for you to show people when we get to the segmentation section.
Definitely.
Okay. And we talked about referring sites. There is an option to turn on a demographics feature, which I can show you really quickly. I don't think FERC has it turned on, but I know NASA does. So there's this demographics feature, and it's not turned on by default, but it'll give you a general breakdown of the age and gender of your visitors. And I know the first question for this one is going to be, how does Google know this information? Well, number one, it's only giving us information from less than a quarter of sessions, so it doesn't know it about everybody. But in many cases, if you have a Google Plus profile, or if when you signed up for a Google account or Gmail account, maybe 7 years ago or something like that, it might have asked you your birthday, it might have asked you your gender, and so they kind of can gather information from Google's internal resources. And then if you're logged into Gmail, say, when you're traveling around the internet, they then can pass this information about sort of your relative age and gender. For some cases, again, look, it's only less than a quarter of all sessions. But that's an option. And if folks are interested in turning that option on for their agency, they can contact us and we can help them do that. What you can't know. So as I noted before, we don't collect PII. We actually are actively always monitoring to make sure that there's no PII in the system. We have on 2 occasions found agencies that pass PII in their URLs, and we've worked with those agencies to both stop using PII in the URLs, and also we exclude it from our data. Please do not pass PII in URLs. That's not a good practice. And I'll leave it at that. You also cannot know the thoughts that are going through your users' heads as they click through, although, who knows with Google? Like I said, I'm glad they don't know the language I speak yet. They only know the language I choose. But I don't know. That's a joke. I hope that Google never knows the thoughts of our users' heads as they click through. All right, I want to show you quickly. I've got a few more minutes to get through this section. I want to show you the channels report, which show you where your traffic is coming from. So it's in acquisition, all traffic, channels. Oops, I'm in NASA. Let's go back to FERC just to continue to use that example. Okay, so we've got a couple different things that appear here. We've got organic search, direct traffic, referral traffic, social, and email. So these are what's called the default channel groupings. Organic search is coming from something like Google or Yahoo or Bing. Direct traffic, theoretically, is traffic that comes to your site directly from the URL bar, meaning if I type in cdc.gov or papahanaumokuakea.gov or things like that, direct traffic. Also representative of if you have bookmarks. But direct traffic is pretty inflated, and I'll go back and talk about that in just a minute. Referral traffic, as Freddie noted, comes from a different site that has a link that refers to your site. And a special sub-segment of referral traffic is social media traffic, which Google has recently broken out into its own section where you can track specifically if things are coming from social media. Now, if we click through these things a little bit, it'll break it down. It'll show us that like most stuff. Oh, so this is the keywords that were used to get to FERC. Or I guess in this case, because the profile only has FERC.gov to get to the site. But you'll notice that 92% are not provided, and that's because Google now is HTTPS. It's secure, so it doesn't send that information with you when you land on your homepage anymore, or you land on your landing page. I'm sorry. So that's when you would use Search Console. And Freddie was talking a little bit earlier about how if you have an independent implementation of Google Analytics, one of the great things you can do is link it with Search Console, and you'll get a lot more insight into the key terms that people are visiting your site with. We've also got, if I click through on referral, it'll tell us the site that the people were referred from. So search.usa.gov, Wikipedia, things like that. There's that e-tariff site. And social, we can see some social stuff. Facebook accounting for most of the traffic coming from social media, also Twitter. Interesting. So one thing I wanted to note really quickly was that direct traffic is often inflated for a couple different reasons. One of them is traveling from HTTPS sites to HTTP sites. So FERC, I think, is HTTPS, which is great. That means that they don't have to worry about this. But if your particular site is HTTP, if there are other sites that link to yours and they are secure, the referral data will not travel across when they come to your site from that page. It'll look like direct traffic. The other thing that confounds direct traffic is link shorteners. And link shorteners are really, really popular in social media these days. They were designed originally because of the character limit in Twitter, but what's interesting now is that Twitter has their own link shortener, which does carry referral data. But if you use Bitly or Owly or any of the other popular link shorteners, there's a very good chance that when someone clicks on your link from Twitter, the link shortener actually strips the referral information, and instead of coming into your report in social as Twitter, it's coming through as direct because it gets stripped. And there's ways to battle that, which we're definitely going to be talking about in a bit. I asked you a question. I just went over this whole thing, and now we were gonna take a poll, but we'll just not take the poll, and I'll just be able to go over this. What ways are direct traffic inflated? Clicks from shortened links, just talked about that. Referrals from HTTPS to HTTP, definitely true. Clicks from desktop email clients, that's another thing. If you have a desktop email client and you're clicking, there's no referral information from that. All of these things, in fact, inflate direct traffic. So just so you know, if you're looking at direct traffic, you're thinking, wow, so many people are coming directly to our site by typing it in the URL bar. It's not usually the case. There are various different reasons why that might not be happening. All right, I don't want to go too much over on my time here for this section, but I do want to show you the campaign URL builder. So the way to combat the link shortener problem is to use campaign URLs. And Google creates this, oh, they changed the look of it. Google created this really, really good tool so that you can use campaign URLs. So let me show you how this works. We've got an example of vote.usa.gov, which is a site that probably isn't getting a lot of traffic anymore, but it was designed to help sign people up to register to vote. And let's say I wanted to, oh, it's just vote.gov now. They changed it, so I'll change that. So vote.gov, and let's say I wanted to tweet about it and I was trying to get people to register to vote. So we got vote.gov. I'm going to input a campaign source. So in this case, I'm going to use Twitter. And the campaign medium being the broader, the source is the more specific thing, and the medium is the larger one. So like that would be where you would have like maybe organic or email or whatever. I'm going to use social, and I'm going to do this campaign name. And setting up these campaign names is very individual to your specific team. We actually have an entire webinar on using campaign URLs, and we'll be happy to send that to you afterward, and you can take a look about how to actually think about strategizing for this. But when I put all this information in, it gives me this link. And it's vote.gov, and it has this little UTM source thing. UTM stands for Urchin Tracking Module, but that doesn't really matter. But if you have UTM source, UTM medium, and UTM campaign, now I can actually shorten this link. And this is Google's shortening service. So what I want to show you is if let's say I put this in a tweet on Twitter and someone clicked on it. What happens is it goes through the shortening process, and then when it loads, it actually loads with all this information in the URL. It doesn't change at all how vote.gov shows you content. It just does this. And what this does is tells Google Analytics to overwrite any information it has for these specific things with the information you have put in. So instead of having a source of direct, because it was shortened and it thought that it came in direct, it'll now write Twitter in the source. And for medium, it'll write social. And then we have this extra dimension where we can set a campaign name. So this is a great way, and then a great way, for example, to strategize for your outreach so you understand which channels are providing the most conversion into your site. And then there's this beautiful campaigns report. We might not see anything in FERC. My VLER, I'm not sure what that is. But let me just show you what it would look like in sort of the GSA profile here. So if I go to the All Campaigns report, you'll be able to see that there are various different campaigns that people are running. And this is what they named it. And then, so this particular campaign is named Benefits, Grants, and Loans. And if I click through here, it then shows me my source and medium that I set. So they set this, and they had two different outreach campaigns. One of them was through email, and one of them was on Twitter. And you can see they got 6 sessions from their Twitter post, and they got almost 9,000 from their email. So because you can set up this particular thing by name and by source and medium, you can then track how your campaigns are performing. Okay, referral traffic. So if I go to all traffic and then hit referrals, we already saw this kind of through the channels report, but it'll tell you the sites and the pages that are most referring stuff to your site. We're still in GSA in this case. So apparently NOAA.gov refers folks to GSA. I'm not sure why. But they refer folks, oh, I see some interesting pages about oceans and weather and climate. From NOAA lead to GSA. So if I use the secondary here and I put in page. Oh, I see. They're using the USA.gov search appliance. So that's why we're getting a lot of referrals there. But you can go to that referral report for your agency and take a look at which sites are referring stuff to you. Okay, let's take a quick look at search keywords. Another report that you can look at is under behavior, site search overview. And this is where if you have a site search turned on, it can then show you the search terms that people are using. Let's go back and see if FERC has theirs turned on. Doesn't look like FERC has their site search turned on. So if you go to this report for your agency and you see nothing here, please let us know and we can help you turn on the site search functionality so that on your site you can get the specific search terms that people are entering here. Cool. We do have their information. It's just that they use DigitalGov search. So we also have a whole webinar on if you use DigitalGov search and how to get your site search information data. All right, moving through. Okay, I went a little over time, but you should all brush your shoulders off. That was a lot of information. Again, I recommend that everybody, look at Aziz Ansari. He's so cool. I recommend that everyone go ahead and take a look at all the reports in the left-hand navigation section. And any questions that you have, you should email us about it. I do want to take a couple questions because I saw that there were some that were coming through. So let me take a look here. Okay. Someone here says, I keep getting trapped in the 7-day default times range. Can I, as administrator, set it for all of EPA to be 30 days? That's an interesting question. I'm not sure about that. We'll have to look it up, but we can follow up with you.
Yeah, sounds like 7-day. Maybe they're looking at 7-day last click versus 30-day last click.
It's just in the.
Or are they talking about the calendar?
In the calendar.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there might be a special setting you have to do to look at the last 30.
I think it always just starts out at 7 days.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
We might have changed ours. Okay, so here's a good question, and we're going to answer this in the next section. How does it work when an office and an agency wants to look at only the pages they control? Do we have to work within the specific agency profile? So the answer to that is yes, you do have to work in the specific agency profile, but we're going to show you how to use segmentations and custom reports to be able to look for a specific site. Campaign tracking URL for PDFs. Can you create a campaign tracking URL for PDFs? No, because the URL for a PDF still doesn't have any HTML behind it, and we don't have the Google Analytics code behind it to take a look. Can DAP Google Analytics track images that are hyperlinked? Yeah, it should definitely be able to track images. In fact, if that image is a JPEG file, it'll automatically track it as a download. And I know one of the big examples we have of that is the APOD NASA site, the astrology picture of the day, where folks are clicking on those beautiful pictures of space. And those are all tracked as specific events.
Hi, folks. All right, we're back from the break. And so now we're going to do a deep dive into finding your own data using advanced segments. This is one of my most favorite parts of analytics because you can get really creative and really kind of bend the tool to your will to really kind of figure out and answer interesting and challenging questions about your data and its trends. So let's jump into talking about how to think about segments. So this is a neat little graphic of how we as analysts need to be thinking about segments. So on the left, you have a bunch of users. They all look exactly the same. So we call this unsegmented, right? So before you segment your traffic, basically all of your data is going to be like it was from just the same people, the same users. Now on the right side in the blue, you'll see what segmented data looks like. So you see everyone looks different, right? So segments help you define specific characteristics about your traffic, about your data from your users. So they help you define and provide boundaries and parameters around what type of interactions, what type of users you want to see. So for example, you could create a segment that says, show me users on Android smartphone devices using a Chrome browser. You could look at mobile device type and see, you could compare a segment of mobile users versus a segment of tablet users. So really the ability to define these characteristics, it's infinite. You could spend hours in this, and this is where a lot of the creativity and a lot of the fun in analytics comes in. So remember our landing page report we just went through. I'm going to walk through a couple examples using FERC and some other sites and just basically show you how to think about segments and how to set them up. So let me go to, oops. Let me go to my tab here. So this is the landing page report. So right now I'm in the FERC agency profile. This is the landing pages report. Right now we're looking at all users, and we see all of the FERC.gov pages here, the landing pages. So let's say your boss or somebody from your team asks you, okay, what percentage of traffic to these landing pages, what percentage of sessions comes from mobile devices? Well, I'll show you how to do that. So it's pretty easy. So right up here, Google Analytics gives you the power to toggle between different segments. Now, out of the box, all users is always selected, but you can go click here where it says choose segment from list, and you can search for different segments. So my boss asked me, okay, what percentage of traffic comes from mobile? So I'm going to click on mobile traffic, and I'm going to hit apply. It's going to load, and then I'm going to be able to see for FERC specifically, I'm going to see all sessions, sessions from all users in the blue. Then I have sessions from mobile traffic in orange. And if you look here, under mobile traffic, it lists the segments up here at the very top of the table of data. You'll see mobile traffic represents 4.22% of all FERC traffic. So this is a really quick way to go in, toggle, leverage an out-of-the-box segment to answer a very specific question about mobile traffic. Now, what's cool here is you can even go to the page level and start looking at the breakdown of traffic between all users and mobile, for example. You could even add in tablet traffic. There's a lot of different ways you can slice and dice this data. Really just depends on what types of questions people are asking you to answer. So one thing I want to go through really quickly with you is how do you pull hostname? So I know in some previous slides we were talking about hostname, how to define a site, how to actually pull data for a site. Again, I'm on the left-hand nav. I'm in all pages, and I am wanting to. I'm in the DoD profile, and I am wanting to understand of the DoD, of the sites in DoD, what traffic is what traffic from Navy.mil is showing up in this profile. So I've created a segment here, and I'll walk you through how I actually set that up. So in addition to out-of-the-box segments, you can create segments in Google Analytics standard reports and custom reports with any type of characteristics. So we've got demographics, we've got technology, you can look at browser, device category, behavior, traffic source, you could define organic search, social media, email. Here specifically, I am trying to understand what percentage of traffic within the DoD agency profile is attributable to Navy.mil. So what I've done here is I've selected conditions under advanced. I've selected host name, exactly matches Navy.mil. And you see here, what's really cool about Google Analytics is it prompts you with pre-populated values so that you don't have to worry about typing in and misspelling something. Now, the other little thing that I threw in here was, let's say you wanted to understand what operating system or you wanted to understand what Android operating system these different users were using. So you could also define and say operating system contains Android to see only Android sessions on Navy.mil. So you can get super creative here. So you just click you click save. And then I'm going to add in another segment. I'm going to do all users. Just as an example. So again, you have a view here. Google Analytics very nicely shows you a comparison between whatever segments you've selected. And we see here that Navy.mil on Android captures almost 3% of page views within this report. So it's pretty interesting stuff, really powerful. You can manipulate and create to your heart's content and really easily answer some very complicated questions that folks on your team may pose or that your boss may send to you. Now, I want to go through one other quick report here. So I am in the FERC agency profile in DAP. Now, let's say somebody on your team or your boss asks you, what percentage of traffic comes from internal agency traffic. So people working at FERC, what percentage of traffic do they represent? So you can easily create a segment to look at that, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, again, you can name this segment whatever you want. I recommend using a kind of a user-friendly name that you're going to remember so you can search for it. Rather than these pre-populated values up here, you're going to go down to conditions under advanced again, like we did before, and you're going to choose service provider, contains, and then Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Now, typically every agency will have their own service provider in this similar type of format, and there's some reporting that you can do to figure out what that is if you're not sure. Or feel free to ping us, and we're happy to figure that out for you. So what we've done here is service provider contains Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So I'm going to hit save. And then what we see here is FERC internal traffic. Now I'm going to do all users just to compare. And that's how you should be thinking about segments. You always want to compare different segments to understand kind of the importance of the data that you're looking at. So in this particular case, FERC is the only website in the FERC agency profile. So you have a trend of all page views for these users, and then you also have a trend for internal traffic. So as you can see here, internal FERC traffic is, I guess, about almost 8%. So that's a really quick way to figure out how to answer kind of a more nuanced question about internal service provider traffic from your agency. let's see here. I have a, let's see, this is another example I'll use. Let me get back to the slides. So yeah, so that's essentially kind of a high-level view of segmentation. We delve into segmentation in more detail in other webcasts. So if you're interested in that, we're happy to point you to that direction. But those specific segments are just kind of scratching the surface of the power and the kind of creativity that you're able to use when you actually create segments and apply them to your data.
Yeah. Thanks, Freddie.
Sure.
Can we pass control over to me? So I think Freddie just demonstrated maybe the 3 most popular forms of segmentation that we see across all of the agencies. One being looking at mobile traffic versus other types of traffic, mobile and tablet versus desktop. And then obviously a real big one being segmenting for a specific website. A lot of you are asking questions about how to do that, and segmentation is a great way to do it. You can just go in your agency profile and segment for the host name you're looking for. And the third one being, we do get often questions about how can I tell how much traffic is coming from internal sources? And as long as you can identify that service provider, like Freddie noted, you can actually do segments to show that. One really cool thing is you can actually do a segment to exclude that traffic. So you don't even have to do any manual addition. You can just be like, okay, that internal traffic is segmented out of this. So as we sprint to the finish here in sort of our last half hour, the other thing that I wanted to show you is custom reports, which are pretty cool and pretty valuable along with segments to be able to get a better understanding of how your specific site is performing rather than all of the sites in your agency. So I want to show you where to access custom reports. It's up here in the left-hand side under customization, and you click that and then hit custom reports, and it's going to show you all of the custom reports that already exist. And actually, since FERC has only one website, I'm actually going to change profiles here and just pick something else that we can take a look at. Maybe, let's see. Yeah, let's just go with like transportation. So what you do when you create a custom report is basically specify the specific metrics and dimensions that you want to see in a report, but then you also get to filter it, and in many cases we'll filter it by a specific website. So if I go here and I click new custom report, there are 4 types of reports that you can create in the custom reporting section: the Explorer report, the flat table report, the map overlay, and the funnel report. The map overlay report is really only worth showing you location information. So I'm not going to go over it today, but it just basically shows you a map. And you can set the metrics that you want to see, and then it'll show it to you on a map as well as in a table. But it's really only worth it for location information. So I'm going to set up an Explorer report here, and we're going to specify a specific transportation website. And in fact, let's just go and figure out which one we want to use here. Let's go to content drill down. So the content drill down report is going to show me all of the different sites that are in the specific profile here. And so looks like transportation.gov, or let's do FAA.gov because that'll be fun. We're going to specify a custom report looking at data for FAA.gov. So I'm going to click new custom report. Now let's say I want to maybe recreate that landing page report that we looked at earlier, but I want to limit it only to landing pages for FAA.gov. So I'm going to create a title, FAA landing page report, and then I have to add some metrics and dimensions. And we're going to start with just an Explorer report, and I'll show you how this works. So the metrics, I guess entrances, and the thing that we said that we wanted to look at was maybe bounce rate. And then the dimension drill down for this will be page. So just so you can see this, the metrics are going to be columns where it shows us the the count of things, and the dimension is going to define what the rows will be. So in this case, I want to see landing pages. And then this is the sort of the bread and butter of a custom report here, the filters. So I can set a filter and say I want the host name to have to be FAA.gov. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking all the data from this agency view. It's got all the transportation sites that participate in DAP in it, and I'm filtering it to say I only want to see this report for FAA.gov. And you could also add other filters. You could say like you filter it to FAA.gov and also for the state of California, like if you wanted to. But for this purpose, we're just going to leave like it is. Okay, so we can see here that we've got specific pages and the entrances and the bounce rate. So now I've effectively taken the report that if we went to the landing page report in the transportation profile, it would contain many, many sites. But now we've limited it only to FAA.gov, and we can take a look at those bounce rates that we want to see, and also understand where people are landing. This is kind of interesting. I think UAS is unmanned aircraft systems. This is people trying to maybe figure out information about drones. Yeah, so this is information about drones. So anyways, that is the simplest kind of report. Now, it's called an Explorer report for a reason. So let's go back. I'm going to go up here and hit Edit and see somebody else also asked if you could export these files in the last section. You can click Export here and go into Google Sheets or Excel or PDF, and it will export this data. And I would recommend if you export the data that you definitely expand the rows first, because if you export it right now, it's only going to show you 10 rows of data. But you could expand it to 5,000 and then get an export. So I'm going to go into Edit, and I'm going to show you what an Explorer report is known for. Basically, we can set more than one dimension drill down, but it's only going to show us one dimension drill down at a time. So if I was interested in knowing the location of the visitors from the landing page, or actually let's do the channel. So if I'm saying, okay, I want to know where those users to that landing page came from, I can look at the default channel grouping. So then if I add that in, notice it was indented. It's going to be the second level of the report. So it'll start off looking exactly the same. But what we do is, the reason it's called an Explorer report is you can explore into certain rows. So let's say for hazmat safety, I'm interested in knowing how people got to that landing page. So I will click through, and now it's only going to show me data for FAA.gov, the hazmat safety page that we're looking at, but it's going to tell me where that data is coming from, or where those visits are coming from, based on the default channel grouping that Google already has. Hopefully, if it ever loads. And so now we can see, okay, for that specific landing page, we've got, it says that most people are getting there directly. That's interesting. It's got some percentage from organic search, some referral, very few of social and email. So that's what an Explorer report is. It only shows you one dimension at a time, but it allows you to drill down into specific rows so that you can see the data. I imagine that if we check this one, maybe it'll be a little bit different. So this one, most people are coming from organic search, which is really interesting. Whereas that hazmat page, it said people were coming directly, but I would bet that there's probably some sort of confounding factor there. So unmanned aircraft systems, lots of referrals as well, almost 20% referral, 60% organic search, quite a bit more social. So that's that particular report. Now, let's show you what the difference between an Explorer report is and what a flat table report is. So an Explorer report, you can only see one dimension at a time, but then you drill down into different dimensions. A flat table report, by contrast, allows you to put more dimensions in a single report. And what that does is pretty much expand the report, because every unique row will have its own place. And I think that'll make more sense when I show it to you. But we're going to use all the same stuff: landing page, channel grouping, entrances, bounce rate. It's just going to show it to you in a different format. instead of now showing me the landing pages themselves, and I have to click through a specific landing page to see that, I can now see everything ranked by entrances in terms of their unique combination of dimensions. So the FAA homepage from organic search is the #1 way to get to the site, but FAA.gov direct, people typing in FAA.gov, is the #2 way. You can see this hazmat safety one that we saw before, that's now #4 for this unique combination. And the other ways to get to hazmat safety are, there's one over here maybe from organic search, but you can see how this differs a little bit. This report will have many more rows because FAA.gov now has a row for every different distinct way someone got to the site, rather than just have FAA.gov and then we click through and it would tell me this other information. And so if we were to expand this a little bit, you'd see all kinds of different pages and how people got to those sites, or I'm sorry, those pages. So that's how an Explorer report differs from a flat table report. We, as many of the other topics that we've discussed today, this is sort of the overview of how things work, but we also have a webinar designed specifically to tackle custom reports and all their different forms and help you understand them. So we recommend that you check that out if you're interested in trying to create some more complex custom reports. The last one I want to show you is a funnel report, and I'm actually going to show you one that's already in existence so that you can see how someone was actually using it. We didn't create this as an example. Actually, another agency created it, if I can find the Department of Education profile. So there's this website that Department of Education runs called College Scorecard. Let's see here. And College Scorecard is a site that was designed to make it so that folks could go get information about colleges to make decisions about where they want to go to school without having to go to each individual university's website and try to figure out a bunch of different things about it. So you can find schools based on degree or based on location, size, name, all these different things. So what the folks that created this site wanted to do was understand how many people were doing a search for a school not by name, as in they didn't already have a name in mind. They wanted to search from one of these other types of areas that you could set, and then they view a school. So as an example, let's say I want to look in Connecticut for a school that's small. So I do this search and it's going to give me a list. And let's say they wanted to know how many people click on a college and then read about it, then go back to the search page and click on a different college or university. Basically, they wanted to see if people were doing comparisons. And so that constituted what we call an intended user journey. They knew they wanted people to land on the homepage, to do a search not by name, to click on a school, go back to the search page and click on a different school. So therefore, they created a funnel report, which is the fourth type of report, and it's the newest one. It's only available in Google Analytics Premium. And if you have intended user journeys, let me tell you, this is the report for you. It's really, really awesome. I'll quickly show you how it's set up. This gets a little more complicated, so I'm not going to go too in-depth, but you can use this report to set up stages of your users visiting. So the first stage was they land on the homepage. The second page was they perform a search, but they specifically said exclude where the search comes from searching by name. And this is all based on how the URL structure is set up. The third stage is click on a school. So the page contains /school because the way they've set up the site, when you're looking at a school, it's got /school. So they know that that pertains to all school pages. The fourth stage was go back to the search results. So they basically go on a page that contains search. And then the last stage was they click on a second school. So you can see it's got 5 stages here. I think that's the most you can set up for a funnel report. But what it then does is show you exactly how people made their way through that intended journey path. 10,000 people landed on the homepage in the last week. Of those, 58% moved on to perform a search without using the school name. 4,257 people did not move to stage 2. Now, this doesn't mean that they left the site. It just means that they didn't do exactly what we asked them to do in stage 2. So about 60% moved on to stage 2, and from there, most of them clicked onto a school and then continued on back to search results. So if we look at the entire journey, and I know this is a little light to see because Google decides to put it in gray, but from step 1 to step 5, 8% of users went through the entire stage. And you can see how it drops on every single step. So almost 60% made it to step 2, then 37% cumulative from the start made it to step 3, and so on and so on. And you can see between each steps how many people made it and where you lost them. So this is an incredible report for folks that maybe have online forms and you want to see if a form goes across 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 pages, like you want to see where people are leaving. If you know that you have a specific campaign, for example, if you have an outreach campaign that's designed to get people to, say, sign up for a newsletter or download a PDF or something like that, you can set up a funnel report that says, step 1 means they came from our Facebook or Twitter post onto a specific page, and then step 3 is they sign up for our newsletter or something like that. And we can actually track how they go through. So the funnel report, in terms of custom reporting, it's the most advanced custom report, but it's also really powerful if you learn how to use it. Okay, a couple things I want to go over before we kind of head into our last takeaway type section. Sampling. So this is on the slide for you so that you can see, but sampling will happen occasionally. Google Analytics has actually recently improved their sampling rates for paid users. So the Google Analytics that we use, which is now called Analytics 360, you'll encounter sampling not as often as you used to, but you'll still encounter sampling. And the way that we can show sampling is, like, if I try to create a report here, let me just do one really quickly. Custom reports. Here's some sort of event report that I had set up in the past. So if I extend this date range by like a lot, there's a chance that it'll start sampling. So the number one way to start getting sample data is to try to report on too long of a time period. And every year at the end of the fiscal year in September, we have a bunch of people asking us about sampling because they're trying to do reports for the whole year. And I recommend not doing that because it's pretty common to get sampling. Okay, so you see up here, it used to be up until literally like a month ago that in the old interface, it would tell you up here, it would say this report represents 100% of sessions, or this report represents 10% of sessions, or whatever. And so you would see very clearly right in this white space area if your report was being sampled or not. Under this new user interface, they don't make it so clear, and it's not exactly the best change. Now they just have this little shield in the corner next to your report. If it's green, it's 100%. But if it's yellow, when you hover over it, it'll tell you how much you're being sampled. And so this particular report is being sampled based on about 78% of sessions. That's not a horrible sampling rate. It'll probably be pretty decent data. It won't be exact, but sometimes you'll see sampling that will be like 2%, depending on how many dimensions you're applying and things like that. And if you get that, or really anytime you get this yellow shield, I recommend you do an unsampled report. And the way you do that is you go under Export and you click Unsampled Report. And when that happens, it'll tell you it'll ask you whether or not you want to have the frequency more than once. You get to pick the format that it'll come in. So I'm just going to leave it at CSV. You can have it email you when the unsampled report is completed, and you hit Request. So then what happens is Google in the background, it does the more tedious, long work to try to figure out your report accounting for 100% of sessions, and it'll email you when it's done. And when it's done, it'll appear in your customization section under unsampled reports. And then you'll be able to see your unsampled reports that you created. And it might take 5 minutes, it might take an hour, depending on the report that you're asking for. But basically, Google in the user interface samples data so that it doesn't have to take that much time with a little bar running back and forth and make you wait for it. Instead, you just click that you want an unsampled report when you see that yellow shield, and it'll do it in the background for you and email you when it's done. What's great about unsampled reports is that it'll also show you how it would look in the Google Analytics interface. So you can get it in like a CSV or whatever, but you can also just check it out here with however it would look, if you set it up and you got 100% in here in the user interface. All right, I think I'm going to pass it back over to Freddie for some kind of last considerations, and then hopefully we're going to be able to wrap up on time.
Okay, great. All right, so this is another one of my favorite parts of analytics and how to think about analytics. We have a more in-depth webinar on this topic, but for the DAP 101 folks, we're just going to give you a high-level overview of this. So choosing the right metrics. So what do you actually include in your reports? That's kind of the big question we're all asking as we go through this. The questions and your site's mission, etc., that's all going to define what metrics you actually pull in Google Analytics. So before you go into Google Analytics and you try to pull a report, you need to really do a couple fundamental things. So you need to answer specific questions. So number one, you really need to understand what is your agency's mission? And how does your website actually help your agency achieve that mission? So what are your site's goals, right? So you're going to go into Google Analytics using your site's goals, and you're going to try to measure that. So what we see quite often is a lot of folks just go in, they pull a buffet of metrics of just simple page views, sessions, users. That's really not a great way of communicating the value of your website and how effective your website is at completing and being successful at its fundamental goals. So really what we're advocating for and what we try to help lots of DAP users with is helping define, what are the questions you're actually trying to answer and who's actually going to receive the report. One thing to think about is, what is your boss? What are they asking about? What are their questions? And this is going to be kind of a lengthy process, right? Because a lot of people don't typically think about these types of things. It's difficult sometimes with certain kind of government websites to figure out what are the actual goals. But it's really important to understand and be able to communicate the context around your site's goals before you go into Google Analytics and start pulling data. Otherwise, it's just going to be a buffet of metrics, and with all that data, you're not going to really have any interesting insights. The kind of next step after you actually pull the report, or while you're thinking about how you're going to pull the report, is how is the end result? How's the report and the data that you get from that report going to influence next steps? So all too often we see folks who just pull data and they're not thinking about how that's going to help them make actual decisions on what to change. So in the back of your mind, we recommend thinking about how are you going to use this data to influence change on the site. Is there a form, for example, on your site that has 10 different steps to it? And based on the data, are you seeing a drop-off from your users in that form? If that's the case, for example, you may want to go back into your web team and say, hey, I think we need to redesign this form because our users aren't completing it, right? So putting together a report that looks at that specific question is key to helping understand how you're going to use that data to actually influence an outcome and kind of next steps on your website. So that's really what we're trying to get to here. Really high level. One quick thing we want to mention. There are dashboards in Google Analytics, and there are reports. These are kind of two different concepts. We're just going to go over them very high level. Dashboards are simply kind of high level 30,000 foot views of data. They monitor multiple metrics simultaneously all in one view. So you really get that 30,000 foot big picture view. You can define your dashboard to include data that you track on a regular basis. This is typically data that you don't need to do a ton of analysis on, right? So perhaps there are some key performance indicators or different metrics that indicate to you a problem on your site that you need to be on the lookout for. Those are the types of things, like if your bounce rate decreases, depending on the context of what your site is trying to accomplish. Perhaps you want to monitor that in a dashboard with some other key kind of trends and metrics. Reports, on the other hand, focus on a smaller subset of data and different metrics. This is where you're really going to do more in-depth analysis. This is where you're going to need to know what questions you're trying to answer before you create the reports. If you don't know your questions, you're not going to be able to create your reports. Definitely don't try to create the reports to try to back into what questions you're trying to answer here. Reports are really good for doing kind of deeper dive analysis. You can get really fancy, really complicated with this. And reports generally are much easier for your external stakeholders to understand than dashboards. Okay, so let's talk about how you actually communicate out different reports to stakeholders. So there is an option within Google Analytics when you create a report to actually email reports to folks. Now, on this screenshot here, you'll see that the email prompt, you can set this up to actually include a specific attachment. You can set up the frequency, the day of the week. There are some advanced options. So this is one way of delivering these reports to stakeholders. I recommend well, I typically don't email reports to folks. I will typically take a report and analyze it and then try to see the trend there and essentially deliver a link to the custom report. That's more detail and more nuance than what we want to kind of go over here. But we did just want to reiterate that there is the functionality of being able to email reports. Now, within an analytics report, you can export to multiple types of files. So let me show you a quick example here. In the last couple of slides, Tim went over pulling the unsampled report, but you do have the option of exporting data to a CSV and other types of files. You can also do Google Sheets. If you're able to use Google Docs in your agency, you can do a PDF. There's a lot of different ways of being able to export this data and disseminate it out to your stakeholders.
One thing to note here, if you're thrown off, I just noticed Google has not pushed him the new user interface yet. So you can see on his screen, the export button is on the left, and he has that little line that says that he's the sampling line.
Yep.
And on my account that I was just using, they've moved the export button to the right, and they changed to that shield. So this is evidence, just even between the two of us, they haven't standardized exactly how everyone sees things yet, because they're pushing that on a rolling basis. So you may see one of these two different things.
That's a great call out. Okay.
So the last thing we want to talk about here is that there's a really big difference between just reporting and doing analysis on those reports. Basically, we run into a lot of folks that say, we say, okay, well, how do you use this information? How do you use the data from DAP? And they say, well, once a month we send out an email with a bunch of information to the supervisors or something, and then we say, okay, well, like, what happens after you send that out? And most of the time, the answer is probably nothing. And you may have noticed that that's a recurring theme throughout all of our training, is that without understanding the goals of your site, simply sending reports once a month on the amounts of page views and users is not going to make any meaningful change for those users in the ease and in terms of the user experience that they have on your site. But it's also not going to give you much insight into what you should be focusing on or where you should be devoting resources. So just kind of wanted to note, reports don't have words. As Freddie was saying, part of the reason, while there is the functionality to email reports from the system, we don't really recommend that folks do that, because in our mind, what's better is taking the report and actually doing analysis and coming up with some sort of takeaway from that, so that you can go to management, and instead of saying we had 12,000 more page views this month than last month, but we don't know why, you can say, we ran a campaign. We changed up how we did things in our social media campaign, and instead of tweeting at 8 in the morning, we tweeted at 2 in the afternoon. And we have visible evidence that because we did that, there was a 15% increase in the amount of people that converted from our Twitter posts onto the website. That's the kind of insight that you want to come up with. And especially if you have a goal, like maybe you have a quarterly goal that you want to increase the amount of visibility from your social posts or something like that. So you just want to be able to try to set things that have a little bit more context behind them, rather than just telling people about metrics. That is the end of the slides. We can take some very last questions before we sign off. One of the questions that I saw was, what is the technical definition of sampling? So I talked a little bit about sampling there. I guess I didn't explain exactly what it is. Basically, when Google Analytics doesn't want to take up too much of your time with a loading bar, like if you're asking for a lot of data, excuse me, it needs to parse through many, many rows in a table to be able to return the report that you want. And so if you're looking for a lot of data or very granular data, it would take a long time for it to create that report. And rather than sit there for 15 minutes with a loading bar, it'll instead take a sample. So it'll say, maybe I'll take 5% of all the available data and then extrapolate from that how much I think was representative of your time period. So that's not always something you want to rely on, especially if they're, really small sample sizes.
Right.
Let's see, Freddie, do you have other questions?
I do not have any of the other questions actually showing up on my end.
Okay. Anyone can email us, and we encourage anyone to email us with any questions or comments from this particular training, and maybe custom report questions or segmentation questions that you might have. We're happy to help you all one-on-one, and our email address is dap@support.digitalgov.gov. And with that, we covered a lot of ground. We thank you very much for being with us today and for sticking through the 3 hours, if you stuck through the 3 hours. And thank you to Freddie for being the right-hand man here and for tag teaming this with me, and to the DigitalGov University team. We hope you all benefited from this, and we hope to see you at our next training. Have a good one.